In this episode of Ask Paul Kirtley, we are going to talk about wearing too many layers. Is bushcraft an appropriate hobby for a 12-year-old? What to teach at indoor sessions for young people? Fires in deserts and music for the bush. Welcome to episode 67 of Ask Paul Kirtley, and the observant among you will tell that I am not outdoors today. You can probably hear it on the audio as well if you're just listening on the podcast. I am in my office, in my study, just getting ready for a trip, and you can keep an eye out for more on that on my blog and on my YouTube channel in the coming weeks. I'll give you a clue though. Hold on. Okay, there's the first clue. If you're watching, you're going to see it. If you're listening, you're going to have to find the video. I'm sorry. Second clue. Third clue, there you go. And, because I know some of you like this sort of thing, I have been preparing my kit, as you can see. I don't think my video camera wants to focus on that particularly well, but yes, all the kit has been cleaned, sharpened, polished, treated, greased, waxed, etc, etc. So I'm not going to sit here in my office wearing these things. Well, this is quite fetching, but I'm going to take it off anyway. Hold that thing. Right, back again. That's more comfortable without all of that on, but that will certainly be useful to me where I'm going. It'll be the protection that I need, and as I say, check my blog and my YouTube channel in the coming weeks for more on that. Okay, so without further ado, let's get on with today's questions. I've got my camera here, but I've got my computer screen there, and that's where I've got the questions today rather than my phone as I normally have it. So first question is about layers, and this is from Ralph, and he asks, "Hi Mr. Kirtley, I remember Morse Kachansky once claiming that you can overdo layering your clothes by wearing more than 5 layers for insulative purposes. He sadly failed to explain this phenomenon in detail though. Could you please help me out in this? Many thanks in advance. Warm regards, Ralph." And yes, I know some people pronounce it Kachansky, some people pronounce it Kahansky, and I'm never quite sure. Kahansky probably, but I have met Morse, but I just called him Morse. I didn't call him Mr. Kahansky. The question about layers, I don't know exactly what Morse is referring to. He may be referring to the fact that it's difficult to manage your temperature if you have too many layers on. Certainly, I know from operating in really cold temperatures, if you get your layering right, I can't think I've ever really worn 5 layers. The most I've ever really worn while moving around is, you know, having a thin merino base layer on, then having a thicker, sort of a 200 gram Alfrotti top or something. And I know I can never pronounce that. Wool power, that's why they changed it, so that those of us that are not Swedish can pronounce it. So 200 gram per square meter wool power top. So I tend to wear a thin icebreaker or similar, and then a wool power 200 gram per square meter on top of that. That's what I wear, and a lot of the time with a shell over the top, if you're operating, if you're hauling a sled or digging or chopping, that's all you need. And then I tend to carry a 400 gram wool power to put over that if it's really, really cold, or if I'm stationary, or just, you know, sitting around in the tent in the evening if it's not that warm in the tent yet. That's something that I wear and take on and off. I also tend to take a mothership jacket, which is a big jacket that goes over the top of anything that I'm wearing at the time, so I don't have to take layers off. And I typically just use, in the northern forest, I typically just use an old Swedish M90 mountain parka, I think they're called, but they're longer. You can get them for about £25 second hand, and they're or surplus, and they're excellent. That was something I learned from Lars Falt when I worked with him. He always had one of those that he just chucked on over the top for riding a snow machine or just standing around while students were building quinzies or something and he was directing things. It's just a good thing to throw on over the top, and I have one of those. And so that's the most I will maybe have 5 layers on if I had the thinnest wool, the 200 and the 400. The 400 would be unusual if I'd been doing anything active. A shell, a windproof, like the sort of thing I was just wearing, and then a mothership. But that, I'm not going to be doing anything with that on. That's very sort of stationary aspect. And yeah, if you were trying to operate with all of those layers on, that would be too many layers. You would get too hot. You wouldn't be able to ventilate properly. You wouldn't be able to regulate your temperature. So it's possible that that's what Moors is talking about. If you've got your layers right, yeah, if you've got good quality layers. Now, if I had 5 layers of cotton on, I'd probably be cold. But if you've got good layers, a good proper layering system, you're not going to be wearing all 5 at the same time under normal circumstances. It is too much. And then the other thing he might be referring to is simply that if the layers are good and they are the right sort of thickness, they're going to be restrictive. You know, you can't move around properly, and that's one, you're just like the Michelin man. That's another thing. And then the other thing that might be a consideration, and again, this might be what he's referring to, and it's certainly something that you do need to be concerned about, is that layers work by air being trapped in them. And if you try and put too many things on, you tend to squeeze the air out of them, particularly if the lower layers get squashed. That's why I tend to wear wool lower down, and if I want to chuck something over the top, it tends to be like a synthetic duvet jacket or a down duvet jacket. But I don't like putting those type of insulative layers and then putting something, you know, tighter or heavier over the top, because you just squash it down. It's like trying to sleep in 2 sleeping bags when one doesn't really fit inside the other one very well. All that happens is that the loft of one of them gets squashed down and you don't get a huge amount of benefit from it. So that could also be the issue that Moors is referring to, or he could be referring to all of those things, because they are all valid considerations. That if your layers are good, you're going to get too hot with 5 layers on. If your layers are not good, they might still be restrictive because they're going to be thick, and that's going to hinder your ability to function. And then also putting layers on in too great a combination is just going to stop some of them working effectively, potentially. So all of those things are valid comments. So hopefully those things are useful to you. I do have some articles, not videos, articles on my blog regarding the sort of clothing that I wear in cold conditions in the winter, and I will link to those below this video. And also I do aim to try and produce a few more things, because my system's changed a little bit over the years. The principles are the same, but I've found different garments sometimes, and people get hung up on particular garments rather than trying to learn the principles. The principles are sound in everything that's on my blog and videos. Nothing has changed there, but over time you find a new piece of equipment. That smock I was just wearing was a custom made smock that I now use rather than the Nerona jacket that I used to wear. The Arctis Aniaka, which wore out. It fell, it's pretty much falling to pieces. It's such a good jacket. I wore it so much, but I needed to get something new, and I got a custom made smock that I use now in the Northern Forest. So things do change over time. But the principles, the layering principles, the clothing principles, the boot principles, the handwear principles, they're all the same. Anyway, let's move on. Is bushcraft an appropriate hobby for a 12-year-old? And this is from Derek, and it's a voicemail. Let's see if we can get this to work.
Hello, my name is Derek, and I just wanted to know, do you think that bushcraft is an appropriate hobby for a 12-year-old? Just wondering.
Well, thank you for that, Derek. Thank you for stepping up and asking a question and being brave enough to leave a voicemail as well. A lot of adults won't do that, so well done. Yes, in short, I think bushcraft is an entirely an appropriate hobby or pastime or passion, however far you want to take it, for a 12-year-old. And as you move into your teenage years, absolutely, I think that's a great time to be learning skills, learning about nature. You're very good at learning when you're at that age. When you're in your teens, you're still able to take on board a lot of information quickly. So it's a great time to be developing knowledge and developing skills. Try and get as much experience as you can. Try and read as much as you can on the subject. Read stories of adventurers and stories of exploration. Read stories of the frontiers. Read some good bushcraft manuals, learn some things from the internet, of course. Please read my blog and find things there, and there's other good stuff. Do be careful with cutting tools. Make sure you're being safe. I remember when I was a kid, from about 10 years old, 9 or 10 years old, I had a Swiss Army knife, and then I had other knives, and I have to say I have the scars to prove it. Number of bad cuts, mainly on my left hand because I'm right-handed, and you end up sticking it places. So do be careful, but don't be frightened. Do be careful. There's some good articles on my site that have been written by myself, and Emma Hampton did a good article as well on knife safety. That's all valid and relevant, and you follow those articles. If you're not silly with a knife or any other cutting tool you're using, you're going to learn how to use it well. And if you can find some people who are a bit older that are able to help you as well, that's always good, for people to show you things. And yeah, learn as much as you can. And even if nobody else that you know, even if none of your friends are interested in bushcraft, if nobody at school that you know is particularly interested in bushcraft. I remember when I was at school, I was interested, it was more survival skills back in those days. As you've probably heard me talk about before, my dad bought me Lofty Wiseman's SAS Survival Handbook when I was 13 because I was very interested. Like you, at that age, I was very, very interested in all of those skills. And my dad bought me that book, and I had a couple of friends who were interested in those type of activities outdoors, you know, making shelters and dens, and you know, we like knives, and you know, it's just that kind of boyhood stuff, and we played outside. But most of our friends at school thought we were weird, thought we were odd. They all lived more in town. We lived out in a village that was a few miles out of town. It was just a small market town, but even that difference made a difference, and they thought we were a bit odd. But that passion has stayed with me through my life. Some of those experiences that I had, even at that age, are valuable to me now. You know, 30 odd years later, some of the things I learned when I was 12, 13, 14, 15 are still really valuable to me now, and it started to form a foundation of experience in the outdoors that you can't replicate. You can't replicate it later. You can't suddenly decide you're interested in bushcraft at 45 and have that same level of experience that you have just by regularly going outside since you were 12. You just can't. So whoever supports you or doesn't support you, I would say it's entirely appropriate. You've got my support, and you've got the support of everyone else who reads my blog and listens to my podcasts, I'm sure. So yes, Derek, it's an entirely appropriate hobby, and you will learn a lot about yourself, and you will learn a lot about the real world, nature, and what's out there, and how you interact with difficulty sometimes as well. And that's a life skill. It's not just about bushcraft and survival. Coming up against frustrations and things that are difficult is a really good thing for anybody to have experience of. Good stuff. If you've got further questions as well, Derek, as you learn, just keep in touch and drop me a line. This is from Miles, and his question is, hey Paul, I'd like to ask you a question about teaching simple bushcraft and camping skills to children and teenagers, please. I'm based in Leicestershire and I'm a leader with my local boys brigade. We want to introduce our members to basic bushcraft and camping skills. During the winter months, we are limited to the indoors on the night that we meet and can only go camping a few times a year due to time and money. Excuse me. Although in the summer months it does become easier to go outside more often. The members that we want to teach these skills to are between 10 and 18 years old. Given all of this, how and what should we be teaching them? Thank you for your time and I look forward to hearing your suggestions. Cheers, Miles. Well, one thing just to mention while it's still in my mind, recently in the comments regarding scouting skills, it was a couple of episodes ago, somebody helpfully made some suggestions about what they teach on indoor sessions, and that could be useful. I think that was episode 62. Let me just have a quick look. I think it was episode 62. Yes, somebody had asked a question about the differences between traditional scouting and modern bushcraft, and we talked about woodcraft skills and camping skills and bushcraft skills in the context of scouting, and someone that's under the name of Castle gave an answer about some of the things, the way that he thinks about teaching scouts and associated, beavers and whatnot. So that was that might be something useful. But I think generally, having had some input to various scout groups and scout leaders who come on courses or ask me questions in the past, I've had similar questions. There's lots of things that you can do indoors. Knots are one of them. Knots can be a bit dry, so trying to give them a bit of context can be helpful, but knots are definitely one that can be done. You can teach about natural navigation. In some ways, some aspects of teaching about that is easier if you've got a whiteboard or a flip chart or something you can draw pictures on and show. And then in the winter, if you can take if you haven't got too much light pollution, if you can step outside on a clear night, if that's possible, just outside the building and have a look at the sky, and that can consolidate what you've been teaching and talking about. You can look at maps and understand what maps are telling you in terms of learning navigation, so learn to understand what contour lines are. You can build models of a map, so you've got a two-dimensional map. You can build using what you've got around you. You can build three-dimensional models of the landscape and look at scales and all of those sorts of things, understanding contour lines and scales and direction and grid squares and the national grid system, and all of those things could be taught indoors. You can teach people how to pack rucksacks. I remember that was something that I was taught by some venture scouts from the scout hut that we operated in. Venture scouts took sessions on how they packed rucksacks for trips they were doing. So they brought their rucksacks in, they brought them in with all of the things that they had, they laid it all out, they explained what the different things were for and why they took them, and then they showed how to pack, including making sure things are waterproof, making sure the rucksack's balanced so heavy things weren't further away from the back, and all of those sort of good things about packing a rucksack. That can all be done. You can teach people about boot care, foot care. You can teach kids about a lot of theory around fire lighting. I know you can't do it inside, but again, you can teach people about the fire triangle and different sizes of fuel. You can even bring those things in. You can say, well, this is fine kindling, this is this and this and this. You can teach people about knife safety. There's lots of things that you can do inside if you've got a kind of village hall, scout hut type building where you're forced to be inside in the winter months because of where you are or because of the lack of light. But there's lots and lots and lots of things that you can do, including all of those, and I'm sure some other things will come to mind afterwards. But yeah, and then also if you are going camping in the summer, get them involved in maybe planning some activities that you're going to do while you're there. They could be planning menus, they could be planning what they're going to need in terms of resources that they're going to have to source when they're there. They could plan how to organize the camp. They could even draw like little schematics of how they're going to organize things, in ideally, where's the kitchen going to be relative to where they're going to be camping, and all of those sorts of things. They can think about that sort of situational awareness, so that when they get to the site, they've got an idea about how they're going to group things. Now, of course, you can have some oversight of that, and that might be something that you've directed them in the past, but if you get them involved, they're going to enjoy that. They're going to enjoy looking forward to going, and also they're going to be more engaged with what's going on the ground as well. So there's lots of ways, just the sort of things that, I'm about to go on a trip, with a couple of colleagues who are also good friends of mine. And we've been planning, we've been looking at maps, we've been looking at equipment, we've been discussing what we're going to take, how we're going to pack it, what we're going to need, how we're going to sort the food out. Why not involve the young people in that as well? If you're making trips, it's the same thing. And if people have never been camping before, it's as big as going on a bigger trip when you're older and more experienced. So I would get them involved in that type of thing as well. Menu planning. How much food do you need? Why do you need different types of food? Hygiene, water purification, all of those things can be gone over. In theory, you can even bring jerry cans in, you can bring water filters in, you can bring millbank bags in, or brown bags, to show them at least. You might not be able to get them wet and have water flowing around in your building and in the room, but you can show them different bits and pieces, so you can talk them through, and then when you're outside you can layer on another layer of practicality. There's lots and lots of stuff you could do. Hopefully that gives you some ideas. And if anybody else has got some ideas, because I'm not a scout leader, but there are plenty of people who follow this video and audio series and my blog in general who are, and if they would like to leave any suggestions as to what they do with their scout troops in the winter months, in the dark days when they can't get outside, please feel free to let rip in the comments below this on my blog, or below this on YouTube as well, for that matter. I think it's easier for people to read through on my blog, but feel free, whatever you find easiest. All right, next question, just in the interest of time, I need to keep going. This is a question from Twitter. Mitchell Green asks, what tips do you have for camping in the deserts in regards to fires, as the largest fuel is twigs? Well, so we're working on the assumption that the largest fuel you've got is twigs. Well, you have to work on the basis of that assumption. You can't magic larger fuel. And you just have to work within the realms of the possibilities of what you've got available to you where you are. It's the same wherever you go, whether it's cold or hot. Now, the thing about deserts is they can be quite cold at night, and that's maybe why you want to have a fire, in which case, if you don't have the right sort of fuel to keep you warm overnight in a cold overnight desert situation, you have to make sure you've got the sleeping kit with you that's going to keep you warm overnight. And also you need to think about considerations as to, should you be sleeping on the ground? Are there scorpions? Are there snakes? Are there other things that you don't want to be on the ground with, depending on whereabouts in the world you are? Because there are, varied deserts in different parts of the world, on every continent pretty much. So that's one thing. It's like, well, if you going to have to not rely on fire to stay warm. You're going to need the equipment to stay warm. That's just reality. And then in terms of cooking, I think you can get quite a lot done even with small sticks, if all you've got are twigs. If you look at desert peoples, and this is where I would be looking, for example, the Bedouin in the Sinai, they managed to do an awful lot with very efficient use of fire, whether it's making tea, whether it's making bread in the embers, quick, hot fires, very efficient, and you could look very much into the skill set that they have. Similarly, desert peoples of the southern United States have similar skill sets in terms of making use of limited resources. You know, have a look in things like Larry Dean Olson's book, Outdoor Survival Skills, because again, that's focused on that part of the world, and see what you can do with those skills in the environment that you're thinking of. I think you have to look to the indigenous skills, because those people have already worked through that problem already, but you also have the benefit of being a modern human in the 21st century, that you've got access to lightweight equipment that even if your skills or your local knowledge are not up to it, you can make up for it with the equipment until your skills and knowledge are up to it. That would be my suggestion. And have a listen to the podcast interview that I've done with Leon McCarran in episode 29 of my podcast. Yeah, episode 29. Have a listen, because he just did a 1,000-mile walk down through the West Bank, Jordan, into the Sinai, and there are some comments there that are probably useful to you as well. All right, last question. Sorry, that's all gone weird and squashed up. Gary, this is from Gary Crossan. Gary asks me, and he isn't the only person to ever have asked me this. It's kind of a, you know, take it as a multi-part joint question from a number of people. This question is, hi Paul, great channel. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us. Anyway, this may sound like an uncommon question. It isn't. You're not the only person who's asked me, Gary. But what sort of music do you listen to heading off into the bush? Well, that's an interesting one. I have quite diverse music tastes. Everything from sort of quite ethereal, ephemeral electronic music, through indie, through some aspects of pop, through heavy rock and metal and all sorts of stuff I like. I'm not a jazz as well. I'm not a huge classical fan, although I do, you know, there's a lot of things that are familiar, you know, like Vivaldi and Beethoven and Mozart and Brahms and Wagner and, you know, all that kind of stuff that's, you know, you hear in a lot of places. A lot of that I like. I don't tend to listen to it a lot at home or on the move, but you know, I have a few bits and pieces in my collection, but I generally tend to listen to more modern music. What I listen to, I don't tend to, so why I'm sort of talking around this is I don't tend to listen to a lot of music while I'm out. So, you know, even when I'm working courses, which is in some ways different to if I'm making a trip myself. So if I'm running a course where I'm teaching people, I'll tend to read a little bit at the end of the day. You know, I'll go back to my tarp or my tent or teepee or whatever I'm using, and I'll just relax. I'll get into my sleeping bag and I'll just read for a bit until I'm feeling drowsy. That tends to be my way of switching off. I don't really like I like hearing the sounds around me while I'm out. I don't like putting music on. I don't like having a radio or music playing in camp. I know some people like that. I really don't like it. That's just, I'm not saying other people shouldn't like it, but personally, not that I have a problem with music. Generally, I listen to music all the time. When I'm working on my computer and writing, I actually like to listen to music. I like to listen to music while I'm writing. It has to be a certain type of music. But if you read anything on my blog, I might have written some notes while I'm out in the field, but when I'm writing it up into an article, I'll tend to have some music on headphones, sometimes on speakers in the house, and that just helps me focus on what I'm doing. But it needs to be kind of often without vocals, often something that's relatively unintrusive, if you like. It, not something that's going to cut across my attention, but something that's more going to focus my attention. So that's when I listen. So related to what I do, I listen to music a lot. Then I also listen to music when I'm traveling. So if I'm doing an overseas trip, for example, I will listen to music on the plane. I don't really like watching movies on planes. I don't like watching things on really small screens. I find that quite unengaging somehow. I just find it too small. I can't watch movies on my phone, for example. I don't watch them even on a tablet. I like to watch stuff on a big screen, where I guess most movies were meant to be shown on big screens, weren't they, in a cinema or a big television. So I don't tend to watch movies. So I will listen to music. I'll listen to music on a long plane journey. I'll listen to music, and I'll listen to podcasts, and I'll read a bit. And it's the same, often when you're doing overseas trips and you're having to get to an airport, and then you have to get from an airport from a big town to a small town that might involve a long road journey or a rail journey. Again, having some music for that is good, and I enjoy listening to whatever takes my fancy at the time, while I'm on a train or while I'm on a bus or in the back of a mini van or what have you, when we're going out to a canoe outfitters or something. But once I'm actually out in the bush, I don't really listen to anything. I don't listen to podcasts really. I tend to listen to podcasts when I'm, again, driving on journeys, getting to somewhere, but not when I'm actually there. I like to listen to what's going on around me, and even on a multi-week trip where you're going back to the tent or the tarp every evening, you've got some time to yourself. I don't tend to, even though I might have music on my phone, or I might happen to have I used to travel with an iPod quite a lot, and then you've got it for the plane, you've got it for the bus journey, you've got it with you anyway. I don't tend to listen to stuff in the tent. Again, I prefer to read and become drowsy that way, and then fall asleep, and that tends to be my routine. So that doesn't really answer your question in a way, because I don't really listen to music. I tell you, the other thing that's interesting is when I'm on a journey, and it's more the case when I'm walking and cross-country skiing, less so when I'm paddling, but sometimes when I'm paddling, if we're paddling on something that's fairly flat and fairly, across a lake that's not too windy or choppy or doesn't require a huge amount of concentration, you just get into a rhythm with the paddling. I tend to find I get certain songs, and it's never the same one twice. Usually it might be something I was listening to on the way there. It might be something I was listening to the previous week. It might be something that I was listening to, I haven't listened to for months, if not years, but something will come into my head, and then that song tends to stick in my head for a little while. And, when I'm walking, that tends to be, just going around in my head, or when I'm paddling, or when I'm skiing, or what have you. And so I guess I do listen to music in that sense, but it's internally generated. It's a recording in my head of part of a song or a chorus or something. So that is a way that music, I guess, infiltrates my trips more than actually putting earphones in and listening to something. So just insight into my brain there, or maybe not at all. And that brings us to the end of this session, Ask Paul Kirtley 67. A bit different. I haven't done one from my study for a long time. And I know last time people were like, oh, you're not outside, you're not a real outdoors person. Well, those of us that make big trips need time to plan things. We need time to write things up from previous trips, and sometimes we are in between trips. We're in between courses or trips with clients or personal trips. We do spend some time inside, and that's necessary. You've got to, like this trip we're just about to embark on, it requires some planning, it requires some preparation, it requires everything to be packed and prepared properly. And what I've decided is that even if I am doing that type of thing, I'm going to sit down and record an episode of Ask Paul Kirtley, because I want to get these out on a regular basis. It was always my intention to get them out on a regular basis, but you know, life happens, and I've really made a resolution this year in 2018 to get them out on a regular basis, even if that means I'm recording them in a slightly unfamiliar territory, or if I have to record a couple at the same time so that I can space them out so that you can get one every week. I would really love to get to the end of 2018 with, pretty much without fail, you've had an episode of this every week, because then you're getting value from this process. The questions are coming in, I just need to find the space to produce these. So hopefully you don't mind too much that this one is from my little office space. I know some of you like listening to the bird song and the babbling brook, or wherever it is that I am for a particular episode, or enjoy me seeing buzzards and kestrels, and sometimes we get deer wandering past in the background or rabbits running around. None of that this time, but hopefully that was still useful to you. I really appreciate your attention. Let me know your thoughts on anything that we've talked about today in the comments below this. Links to anything that I said I'd link to will be below the videos, whether the video is on YouTube or whether the video is on my blog. And as always, this is available as an audio podcast on all the major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasting app, Stitcher, Player FM. It's also put onto SoundCloud. Please subscribe on your favorite platform. Even if you don't listen to podcasts a lot, if you could just choose one and subscribe, that helps me, because it makes it more visible to people who do listen to podcasts, and it puts this in front of people who would generally like it, because those systems see, oh, they listen to this, that person listens to this as well, so this person will probably like that. So it's useful to get this up the rankings, as it were, so that people who would benefit from it. And also the other thing you can do is just share this episode wherever you see it, whether it's a link to SoundCloud, it's a link to the podcast, it's a link to a video or my blog. Just share that on with your network, because your friends often like the same sort of things as you do, at least some of them do, and that would be appreciated if you could share it with them, because that helps me get good questions that I can answer for everyone. It helps the popularity of the show, which helps the visibility of the show, which helps me as well, helps me keep it free actually. And so anyway, enough rambling on about that. I'm going to get on with my day. I'll let you get on with yours, but I really appreciate you watching and listening, and I will see you on the next episode of Ask Paul Kirtley, and that might be from a more interesting natural environment than my office. Keep your eyes peeled. Cheers.